Bonjour guys, this is Andong. Today we're making the one, the only soup à l'oignon gratiné, also known as French onion soup. And you know what? That one only took around 30 minutes to make from scratch. Welcome to the third episode of Soup Season. You know me guys, I can't help myself. If I cook something, I want to know what the story is, but don't worry, we'll keep it brief this time. So as far back as ancient Rome, people were making broths with onions and added stale bread, which would kind of come back to life this way. Both of these things were cheap to grow or buy, which made them staples among lower class or poor people, which I think was pretty much everybody back then. And this trend continued well into medieval times. Generally, throwing whatever you had into a pot of boiling water was one of the few ways for farmers and peasants to cook food. But you should know that many of these early soups were actually grain-based, which means they were more like a goopy porridge, which people then served on stale flat bread they called trenchers. Because guess what? A bowl, yeah, they were around, but that was only something reserved to the rich and powerful back in the day. But you know how it is, money isn't everything. So even though those poor people were eating their soups from a bread trencher, once they were done eating the soup, they could actually eat the trencher itself, which honestly sounds pretty good to me. And until trenchers and bowls made out of wood or metal became a thing, that was a very common way to eat things. And this is just a thought, but going back to eating more food out of bowls that are actually old bread could solve quite a few issues these days. What I'm saying is onion-based soups and bread is probably one of the oldest pairings in food history, period. And so it shouldn't come as a huge surprise that you can find the earliest mentions of a French soupe à l'oignon as far back as the 14th century. This is just a German book that contains a translation of said recipe, which, by the way, if you know German, this is hilarious. And actually the only major difference in terms of ingredients is the addition of peas and the absence of cheese, which, you know what? Makes it a completely different dish if you ask me. So when did French onion soup become what it is today? Well, for that, let me take you to 17th century Paris, and more specifically an iconic marketplace called Les Halles. Les Halles has been the closest thing France had to a mega shopping mall since the 12th century, yes. So as you can imagine, they sold everything under the sun to both rich and poor alike. And of course, every mall needs a food court. And in the case of 18th century Les Halles, that mainly meant one soup vending stall after the other. Folks would grab a bowl of cheap and thin but heartwarming soup and have it with a piece of bread. Onion broth was delicious, it was affordable, it was a popular hangover cure, and it kept you warm during in- and outdoor shopping. The neighboring restaurants, they saw the success of the soup stands and they thought to themselves, well, I want a piece of that cake. So they started making similar soups, but since they were serving wealthy people, cost wasn't that big of an issue, but craveability was. It didn't take very long for them to start zhuzhing up things a little bit in terms of flavor by adding herbs and maybe white wine, and you know, the bread, instead of having it on the side, it went on top, and maybe most importantly, there was a huge heap of cheese on top of that bread, which you would then add into a wood-fired oven, melt it to get bubbly, delicious golden goodness. Et voila, the classic French onion soup was born. And I really want some now. So let's make some French onion soup, shall we? So first things first, I gotta come clean about something, which is that I have actually never ever made French onion soup in my life. I've certainly had some, but I've never made it. And I thought it would be fun, even though I normally recipe test a lot for the channel, to just roll with it and do the first attempt ever on camera with you guys, so please be gentle. Now obviously French onion soup starts with a ton of onions. Okay, that was a bad idea. And this, according to the labels, is 1 kilogram of onions, even though it doesn't look like that. But obviously we're not using whole onions, we have to cut them first. I hope you watched my video called The Ultimate Guide to Onions, because in that one I explained that